It was the fall of 2012, early October, when I decided to go hunting alone in a stretch of woods called Black Pine Valley, a place about 40 miles outside Missoula, Montana. I was 28 then, working construction most of the year, but I always took a few days off in the fall to get away from everything. The valley wasn't too far from civilization, but it had a reputation among hunters for being empty, quiet, and isolated. That's exactly what I wanted. The weather forecast had said it might rain, but the morning I left, the sky was clear and pale blue. I packed everything I needed: my old Remington 700, a canvas tent, sleeping bag, a small cooler with food, a stove, and a map of the valley. The air had that sharp chill that comes right before winter, and the smell of pine sap hung thick around the trailhead. I parked my truck near the edge of an old logging road that hadn't been used in years and started hiking deeper in. The first few miles were peaceful. The forest was silent except for the wind pushing through the branches and the occasional caw of a crow somewhere above. The ground was covered with fallen needles that muffled every step I took. There were animal tracks near a creek I crossed, deer mostly, and something larger, probably elk. That was what I was after. By the time the sun was starting to slide behind the ridge, I'd found a good spot to camp. It was a small clearing beside a narrow stream, surrounded by thick pines that made a kind of natural wall around me. I pitched my tent, collected some dry wood, and got a small fire going before it got dark. The smoke curled straight up into the cool air. I ate a can of chili, washed it down with a beer, and just sat there listening to the forest settle for the night. Around 10, the fire had died down to orange embers. The temperature had dropped fast, and the forest had gone quiet in a way that felt heavy. When you're alone in the woods at night, you start to notice every little sound. The way branches pop in the cold, how the stream sounds different depending on the wind, how the forest can suddenly seem to hold its breath. I felt that stillness settle in around me. I crawled into my sleeping bag and tried to sleep, but the ground was cold and uneven, and the wind kept pressing against the tent fabric with slow, uneasy movements. At some point, maybe after midnight, I woke up. I didn't know why at first, just that my eyes snapped open and my heart was already beating faster than normal. The forest was silent again, too silent. I held my breath and listened. Then I heard it, a faint crunching sound, like someone stepping on dry needles. Slow, careful, too heavy to be a rabbit or raccoon. My first thought was maybe a deer, but something about the rhythm of the steps didn't sound right. They were spread out, uneven, like someone trying not to make noise. I stayed completely still. The sound circled around the tent, maybe 10 or 15 feet away, then stopped. I could hear my own breathing inside the sleeping bag. I reached slowly toward my rifle, which I had leaned against my pack just beside the tent flap. My hand was shaking a little, and I hated that. After a while, nothing else happened. The steps didn't return. The forest stayed still again. I laid there awake for what felt like an hour, staring into the dark, until exhaustion finally won out. When I got up in the morning, there were fresh tracks around the campsite. They weren't boot prints, but they also weren't clean animal tracks. They looked messy. The ground was soft from dew, and the impressions were long, wide, and dragged slightly, like someone walking with uneven weight. My stomach turned when I saw them, but I told myself it was probably a bear. The tracks went off toward the tree line and disappeared. I packed my gear for the day and pushed it out of my head. The morning hunt went fine. I followed a small game trail uphill for a few hours, saw some deer, but nothing close enough to shoot. The forest was beautiful in the daylight, shafts of light coming through the tall pines, the smell of damp earth and bark, the kind of silence that feels clean and endless. Still, every now and then, I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, thinking I'd heard something behind me. Every time it was just the wind or a squirrel. I told myself I was being jumpy because of that noise last night. By afternoon, clouds had started rolling in. thick, gray ones that swallowed up the tops of the trees. The air felt heavy, and the wind picked up fast. I decided to head back before it started raining hard. When I got to camp, everything looked fine at first. Tent still standing, gear where I left it, but when I looked closer, I saw that my cooler was tipped over and the lid was cracked open. My food was half gone. The wrapper from my jerky bag was shredded near the fire pit. That bothered me more than it probably should have. Animals don't usually mess with human scent like that. It meant something or someone had been comfortable enough to come that close. Rain started to fall just before dark. Not a downpour, but steady and cold. The fire wouldn't stay lit for long, so I sat inside the tent, eating a cold can of beans, listening to the rain pattering on the fabric. Every sound outside seemed amplified. The wind, the branches creaking, drops falling from the trees. I tried to distract myself, checking my rifle, tightening my boots, reorganizing my pack, but my nerves were wound tight. Around midnight, I woke up again, this time to a sharper sound, something metal clinking softly. It was my rifle sling. I froze. Then, under the sound of the rain, came that same soft crunching noise, closer this time. I reached out slowly for my flashlight, but before I could turn it on, something brushed the outside of the tent. Just one quick drag of fabric, like a hand sliding across it. I stopped breathing. My whole body felt cold. Then came a faint wet sound, like something sniffing near the zipper. I grabbed my rifle and chambered around, the sound of the bolt cutting through the silence. Instantly, whatever was out there backed off. I heard it move away into the trees, slow steps, breaking twigs, then nothing. I sat there in the dark, holding the rifle upright, heart hammering in my chest, until I saw the first gray light of dawn. When I finally stepped out, the rain had stopped, but the fog was thick and heavy, hanging between the trees. I looked around, checking for prints, and sure enough, there were more.
Bare footprints.
Human. No boots. Just long, muddy prints around the tent, circling it twice before heading off toward the stream. That was the moment it hit me. Someone had been watching me. Someone barefoot, out here miles from any road or cabin, in the freezing rain. I packed everything as fast as I could. My hands were shaking while I did it. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to get out. The hike back took twice as long because I kept stopping to listen. Once, I thought I heard steps behind me, but when I stopped, the forest went quiet again. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia. When I finally saw my truck through the trees, the relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. But when I got closer, that relief died fast. The truck's driver's side door was open. I know for a fact I had locked it. The glove box was open, my map gone, and the small folding knife I kept on the dashboard was missing. I drove out of there fast, faster than I should have on that old road. The whole way back to town, I kept checking my mirrors. Every turn of the tires, every shadow between trees made my stomach twist. When I finally hit pavement again and saw the first gas station, I pulled over and just sat there for a few minutes, breathing hard, trying to process everything. I didn't go back to Black Pine Valley after that. I told myself maybe it was a squatter, maybe some drifter living off the grid who didn't want me there. That explanation made sense. It was the only one that did. But sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about those footprints. About how they circled the tent twice, quiet, deliberate, like whoever it was just stood there for a while, listening to me breathe through the thin wall of fabric. And I think about that missing knife, the one I never found again. I still have the same truck, still have the same rifle, but every time I pack for a trip now, I make sure to double-check the locks before I lie down to sleep. Because the scariest part of that trip wasn't the sound or the prints or even the open truck door. It was realizing that someone out there, deep in those woods, had been watching me the whole time, and that they wanted me to know it. It was the summer of 2016 when I decided to go deep into the Amazon rainforest. I was 32 at the time, living in Brazil for work, and I had grown obsessed with the wild. The real, untouched kind, far away from cities, roads, or even villages. I had saved up enough to take a few weeks off and explore a section of the forest near the Rio Jutai, far from tourist spots. I packed light but carefully: a tent, sleeping bag, rifle, machete, dried food, water filters, and a satellite tracker that I could use to mark my location. I had gone camping and hiking plenty of times before, but this trip was supposed to be something different. I wanted silence, distance, and the sense of being completely alone. The flight to the nearest outpost was a small propeller plane that dropped me and my pack on a rough airstrip. From there, I took a motorized canoe down the river for about an hour, then walked inland, following a narrow game trail until I found a small clearing surrounded by thick trees and vines. I set up camp there next to a creek. The air was heavy, humid, and smelled of wet soil and leaves. The sound of insects was constant, like static that never stopped. By late afternoon, I had my tent up, a small fire burning, and my pack hung from a tree branch to keep it away from the ground. I ate some dried meat and beans, cleaned my gear, and sat by the fire until the forest turned black. Nights in the Amazon are a different kind of darkness, so thick that even your own hands vanish when you reach out. The noises changed too. Frogs calling, things moving in the brush, branches snapping somewhere in the distance. It wasn't frightening at first. It was just alive. The forest never slept. The first few days went by quietly. I hiked during daylight, taking notes, marking trees, checking the animal tracks by the creek. I saw capybaras, macaws, even a tapir once. Every evening I returned to the camp sweaty, muddy, but content. It was the kind of exhaustion that felt good. But then, around the fourth night, something changed. It started with a sound, faint, but sharp enough to pull me out of half sleep. It was just after midnight, and I was lying inside my tent. The fire outside burned down to glowing embers. I heard movement, soft steps, not animal-like. Too slow, too deliberate. The forest was alive, yes, but there was something off about this sound. It came from beyond the creek, in the thicker part of the brush. It wasn't heavy like a boar or a jaguar. It was lighter, like someone trying not to make noise. I stayed still, barely breathing, listening. After a few seconds, it stopped. I waited a long time before moving again. The next morning, I looked for signs. The ground was damp, and I found no prints, but I felt uneasy. I told myself it could have been a capuchin monkey or even a sloth dropping from a branch. The forest could play tricks on you if you let your imagination run wild. But on the next night, it happened again. Around the same time, the same sound, footsteps. Closer this time. I grabbed my rifle quietly and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The moon was dim behind the clouds, barely lighting the clearing. I didn't see anything, but I could hear breathing. Not the deep huffing of an animal, it was shallow, human. My skin went cold. I called out softly, hoping to scare off whatever it was. No response. The breathing stopped. Then a sudden rustle of leaves and branches snapped, and the sound faded into the forest. I stayed awake until dawn, rifle across my chest, staring into the dark. The next morning, I packed my gear tighter, moved my tent 20 meters closer to the creek for a clearer view, and built a higher fire ring. I felt watched all day. When I went to fill my canteen from the creek, I found a strange mark in the mud. A footprint. Human. Barefoot. It wasn't mine. It was smaller, lighter, but fresh. I felt my stomach tighten. The nearest village was miles away, at least 2 days by foot. There shouldn't have been anyone here. That night, I built up the fire higher than before and kept the rifle beside me. The jungle noises felt louder somehow. Every croak, every crack of a twig seemed sharper. I stayed awake for a long time, eyes half on the fire, half on the trees. Around midnight, the noises began again. Only this time, they didn't stop at the edge of the clearing. Something or someone was circling my camp. I heard light steps, moving slowly around the fire's glow. I turned, trying to follow the sound, but every time I looked in one direction, the noise came from the opposite side. My pulse hammered in my chest. I picked up the rifle and shouted again, my voice shaking in the thick, heavy air. Nothing answered, but the circling stopped. Minutes passed. I sat there, gripping the rifle so tight my fingers hurt. Then, faintly, from behind my tent, came the sound of breathing again, close enough that I could hear the exhale. I spun around and fired a shot into the dark. The flash lit up the trees for a split second, and in that flash I thought I saw a shape, a figure crouched low. Then it was gone. The forest went dead silent after the shot. Even the insects stopped. I waited until sunrise, sitting motionless beside the fire. When light finally crept in, I walked around the perimeter. I found nothing, no blood, no tracks. But near the creek, on a fallen log, I found something that made my skin crawl. It was a piece of my shirt, torn clean from the sleeve I'd hung to dry on a branch the day before. Someone had taken it. That was the moment I decided to leave. I packed fast, barely ate, and started heading back toward the river. The forest felt heavier with each step, like it was closing in on me. Every few minutes, I stopped to listen, and sometimes I swore I could hear faint footsteps behind me, just far enough to stay out of sight. The day dragged on. The heat was suffocating, and the air buzzed with mosquitoes. Around late afternoon, I reached a narrow animal trail that led downhill toward the river. I followed it, moving faster, sweat soaking through my shirt. At one point, I turned around, and that's when I saw him. He was standing far back between the trees, barefoot, shirtless. His skin was dark from the sun, his hair matted. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell he was staring right at me. I froze. We just stood there, neither moving. Then he tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. I didn't wait to see what he'd do. I turned and started walking faster, almost running, pushing through vines and roots, branches cutting at my arms. I didn't look back again until I reached the riverbank. The canoe was still there. I shoved it into the water, jumped in, and started the motor. My hands shook so badly that I almost dropped the paddle. As I moved down the river, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone on the bank watching me. But there was nothing. It took me an hour to reach the outpost again. The man who managed it looked surprised to see me back early, but I didn't explain much. I just said there was someone out there, living alone, maybe hunting or hiding. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't believe me. That night, I slept inside the small cabin at the outpost, but even there, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time the wind rustled the trees outside, my body tensed. I kept thinking about the torn piece of my shirt, the breathing outside my tent, the quiet circling steps. A week later, when I was back in Manaus, I read about a missing person report. A hunter who'd vanished months earlier somewhere in that same region. Locals said a few people went missing there every year, and that sometimes bodies turned up deep in the forest, too far gone to identify. I never went back. I still camp sometimes, but only in open places, where I can see the sky, where I can hear the wind and not the breathing of someone hiding in the dark. I still think about that man, standing motionless between the trees, and I wonder how long he'd been watching me before I ever heard a sound. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still hear that slow, careful step, the sound of someone circling just outside the light. I went camping alone in the summer of 2014, somewhere deep in the Black Ridge area of northern Arizona. I was 29 back then, and I'd been doing solo trips for a few years, mostly for peace and quiet. I worked in a loud construction job in Phoenix, and getting away into the woods was the only thing that seemed to clear my head. That summer had been rough, long days, heat, dust, and barely any rest. So when I got 3 days off, I packed up my old Ford Ranger, threw my tent, sleeping bag, some canned food, and a small cooler of beer in the back, and drove north. I took the long route through smaller highways because I hated traffic. By the time I reached the dirt road that led up toward the ridge, it was late afternoon. The sky had that heavy yellow look, like it was holding back a storm but not quite ready to break. The road wound up into dense pine woods, quiet except for my tires crunching over gravel. No cars, no people, not even another campsite for miles. I liked that. I always tried to find spots no one else used. I parked the truck near a flat clearing that had a good view of the hills. The trees were tall and thick, the ground covered in pine needles and patches of dry grass. I pitched my tent, set up a small fire ring with stones, and started cooking a can of chili. It was simple, but it felt good. The air smelled like sap and smoke, and for a while, everything was peaceful. When the sun started going down, the woods changed. The wind picked up, the light dimmed fast, and the whole place felt different. I'd camped alone enough to know that nights in the forest always sound louder than you expect. Branches cracking, distant animal calls, the occasional rustle in the underbrush. Most of the time, it's just raccoons or deer. I told myself that again and again. Still, that night, something felt off. I couldn't explain it, but it was like the air had gone heavier, thicker. I sat by the fire until around 10, then crawled into my tent. I had my flashlight, my knife, and my small rifle next to me just in case. I drifted in and out of sleep, waking up every now and then to faint sounds outside. Around 1 a.m., I woke up again, but this time it wasn't a small noise. It was something heavy. I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving just outside the tent. The kind that pressed down the soil. I froze. It wasn't the skittering of a small animal. These steps had weight. My first thought was a bear, but then I realized there hadn't been any bear sightings around that area for years. Plus, the steps didn't sound like an animal walking on 4 legs. They were spaced apart, one at a time, like someone walking slowly, trying not to make noise. My hand went to the rifle. I didn't move, just listened. The sound circled part of the tent, then stopped completely. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. I waited, counting in my head, trying to decide if I should unzip the tent and look or just wait it out. After a few minutes, the sound started again, this time farther away, like whoever it was had moved off toward the trees. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping the rifle, barely blinking. By dawn, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The ground was damp from a bit of drizzle. I checked around the site, half expecting to see nothing. But near the back of my truck, in the soft dirt, there were footprints. Human ones, barefoot. They weren't mine, too long, narrow, and deep. They led out into the trees and disappeared. That messed with me. I thought maybe some hiker had gotten lost and wandered through, but who walks barefoot through pine needles and rocks at night? I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was just tired, maybe imagining half of it. I decided I'd stay one more night and then leave early the next morning. I wanted daylight for the drive back anyway. The day went by quietly. I went for a short walk around noon, following a small trail that led deeper into the woods. About half a mile in, I found something strange. An old, rusted metal cooler half buried in dirt and leaves. It looked like it had been there for years. Out of curiosity, I dug a bit around it and managed to lift the lid. Inside were scraps of plastic and a couple of bones. They didn't look animal, too clean, too white. I dropped the lid shut and stepped back. I didn't want to believe what I thought I saw. I just turned and walked straight back to my site, trying to ignore the pit in my stomach. By evening, the sky darkened again. The storm that had been holding off finally came. The rain started slow, then poured hard. My tent rattled with every gust of wind. I sat inside, listening to the rain pounding the fabric and the trees creaking. Around midnight, I started hearing it again. Movement outside. At first it blended with the rain, but after a few minutes, I could clearly hear someone stepping closer. Then I heard something hit the side of the tent. A light tap, like a hand pressing against the fabric. I aimed the flashlight toward that side and saw a faint outline pushing in. A human shape. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The shadow moved slowly, then stopped. I yelled. Not words, just a raw sound, and unzipped the tent in one motion, rifle in hand. The rain hit my face hard. I swung the light around but saw nothing but wet trees and mist. Whoever, whatever had been there was gone. I stood out in the rain for a while, scanning every direction. Then, just as I turned toward the fire pit, my flashlight caught something near the tree line, a small shape on the ground. I walked closer, heart racing. It was a piece of rope, tied into a loop. Right beside it was a small pile of bones. Old, yellowed, maybe animal but small enough that it was hard to tell. There were also bits of clothing, so decayed they almost blended with the mud. I backed away, the beam shaking in my hand. I didn't sleep at all that night. At the first sign of dawn, I packed everything into the truck as fast as I could. I didn't bother folding the tent or cleaning up. I just threw it all in the back and drove. The dirt road was slick and rough, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. About 2 miles down the road, I came around a bend and stopped. In the middle of the trail, half blocking it, was a large tree trunk that hadn't been there before. It looked freshly cut, not fallen naturally. I got out to move it, but then I noticed something else. On the bark were fresh scratches, like someone had dragged metal across it. And stuck into the side of the tree was a small knife, rusted but placed there deliberately. That's when it hit me that whoever had been around my camp hadn't just stumbled onto me. They were watching, maybe for days. I backed up, turned the truck around, and drove the long way out, deeper into the hills until I reached another road that led down to a highway. I didn't stop until I was 2 towns away. I checked into a cheap motel, locked the door, and just sat there for hours trying to calm down. A week later, after I got home, I kept thinking about that cooler, those footprints, the bones. I tried to report it to the local sheriff's office, but when they went out there, they said they didn't find anything except old campfire ashes. They said maybe animals dragged things away after the storm. I didn't argue. I didn't want to go back there anyway. It's been over 10 years now, but I still think about that night. Sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I can still hear the rain on the tent, the sound of footsteps circling just outside. I haven't gone camping alone since. I still go up north sometimes, but I stick to campgrounds now where there are other people around, where I can see lights at night. Every time I pass a patch of woods that looks too quiet, too still, I get that same feeling in my chest, like someone's watching from the trees. And I know deep down, whoever was out there that night wasn't just passing through. They were waiting, and for some reason, I was the one who found their place. It was the summer of 2016 when I decided to take a short solo camping trip out near the Lake District in northern England. I'd been working too many hours that month, staring at screens until my eyes burned, and I just wanted to clear my head. I wasn't new to camping. I'd gone out plenty of times before, but this was the first time I'd gone completely alone. I thought it would be peaceful, quiet, simple, a bit of rain maybe, but I was wrong about the peaceful part. I left Manchester around noon, driving my old silver Vauxhall Astra packed with gear. I had a tent, sleeping bag, lantern, and enough food to last 3 days. It started raining lightly about halfway through the drive, and by the time I reached the edge of the woods near Keswick, it had turned into that steady cold drizzle that England seems to specialize in. The air smelled of wet soil and pine, and the sky had that thick gray blanket that makes it look like the world's been muted. I parked just off a small dirt road, far enough from any main track that I wouldn't see headlights. I carried my gear down a narrow muddy path that led to a small clearing surrounded by trees. There was a small stream nearby and just enough space to set up the tent on level ground. The rain was falling harder by then, tapping on the nylon as I pitched the tent. My hands were slick, cold, and dirty, but after a few minutes, I got it up properly and crawled inside to set things out. The sound of rain hitting the fabric was almost soothing. I unpacked, laid out my sleeping bag, and sat with my small camping stove heating water for coffee. It was early evening, but already dark under the trees. I remember looking out at the woods and seeing nothing but shadows moving in the wind. No birds, no animals. Just the rain and that deep forest silence that gets into your head. By the time it was completely dark, the rain had turned heavy. It came down in thick sheets, hammering against the tent. I could hear the water rushing down the small slope behind me, pooling around the edges. I checked the pegs, tightened everything, and sat back inside, listening to the storm. I wasn't scared, just alert. There's something about being alone in the middle of nowhere that keeps your nerves awake, even when nothing's happening. A few hours later, I noticed something strange. The sound of rain had a rhythm to it, and between the hits and drips, I started hearing another noise. A softer, uneven crunch like footsteps in wet ground. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or fox, but then it stopped, started again, and paused, like someone was stepping carefully around. I turned off my lantern. The tent went completely dark except for faint flashes from lightning above the trees. I sat still, barely breathing, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. A single step, then another. It was too slow for an animal. The spacing between the steps was wrong. I told myself it was probably water dripping from a branch, maybe a branch breaking under its own weight. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I reached for my flashlight and aimed it at the thin wall of the tent, but I didn't switch it on. I just waited. The rain drowned everything for a moment. Then I heard it again, wet grass moving. Then a faint scrape, like a boot sliding against mud, came from the direction of the stream. I forced myself to unzip the tent a few inches and peek outside. My flashlight beam cut through the rain and mist, landing on the trees. The ground was shiny and black with water. Nothing moved. I scanned the clearing slowly. There was no one there, no shapes, no animals. Just rain falling in silver streaks through the light. I waited another minute, then zipped the tent back up and tried to calm my breathing. I must have sat like that for half an hour, listening to every sound, until the rain started to fade a little. The steady downpour turned into a lighter drizzle. I started to feel stupid for getting so worked up. Maybe I was just tired and jumpy from the drive. I lay down and pulled the sleeping bag up to my chin. The ground was cold underneath, but I managed to drift in and out of sleep. Sometime later, I woke up again. The rain was still falling, but the sound outside had changed. It was quieter except for one thing, the faint crunch of footsteps again, but this time right behind the tent. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't move. Whoever or whatever it was, they were close. Too close. I heard mud squish under a boot. Then silence. I turned my flashlight toward the back of the tent and waited for lightning to flash. When it did, for just a second, I saw a shadow through the thin fabric. A tall figure standing completely still. No movement, no sound. Just there. The moment passed, and it was dark again. My throat went dry. I felt frozen in place, like my body refused to move. I stayed like that for minutes, maybe longer, before finally unzipping the tent slowly, inch by inch. I leaned out with the flashlight shaking in my hand. The beam hit nothing but trees and rain. Whoever it was, if there had been someone, was gone. I swept the light across the ground and saw footprints. Fresh ones. Deep, clear, shaped like boots, leading from the trees to the back of my tent and then disappearing toward the woods. That was enough for me. I packed up everything as fast as I could, not even caring about how wet it all got. My hands were trembling. I stuffed the sleeping bag, the stove, everything into my backpack. I kept checking over my shoulder every few seconds, waiting to see someone standing there again. I killed the lantern, zipped the tent, and started walking fast down the muddy path toward where my car was parked. The rain had picked up again, pounding against my jacket, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get back to the car and lock the doors. The walk back should have taken about 10 minutes, but it felt like an hour. The path was slick and narrow, and every gust of wind made the trees creak and sway. My flashlight kept dimming, the beam flickering with every few steps. I slipped twice, nearly falling, but I didn't stop. When I finally saw the faint silver reflection of my car in the light, I almost ran the last stretch. When I reached it, the first thing I noticed was the mud on the rear door handle. Fresh mud, smeared like someone had tried to open it. I froze. My breath came out in short, shaky bursts. I looked around, shining my light into the trees, but there was no movement, no sound now except rain hitting the roof of the car. I unlocked the driver's door, jumped in, and slammed it shut. The first thing I did was lock all the doors and start the engine. The headlights lit up the forest road in front of me, and for just a second, I thought I saw a figure far back near the edge of the light. But when I blinked, it was gone. Maybe it was just a branch, or maybe I imagined it. I drove until I hit the main road, tires sliding on the wet mud. I didn't stop until I reached a petrol station about half an hour away. I sat there in the parking lot, rain still drumming on the roof, trying to steady my hands. I looked back at the back seat and the windows, nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me out there. When the rain finally eased off, I got out to stretch my legs. I noticed something then that made my stomach twist. There were faint streaks of mud on the side of the car, long ones, like someone had brushed their hand across the metal. I wiped them off with a rag, locked the doors again, and drove home. I never went camping alone after that. I told myself it was just a hiker passing through, someone lost, maybe curious about my tent. But deep down, every time I think about those footprints and the muddy handprint on my car, I know someone was out there watching me that night, and they were close, too close. It was early October of 2019 when I decided to go camping alone for the first time. I was 27 then, working in a warehouse in Northern Oregon. Most of my days felt the same: work, eat, sleep, repeat. I had saved up for a short week off and wanted a break from everything. I didn't want to go anywhere crowded or touristy, so I picked a place that barely anyone talked about anymore. Merrow Creek Trail, an old hiking and camping area deep inside the Cascade Mountains. I read online that it had been used years ago but was closed for maintenance after a few small landslides damaged parts of the road leading there. A few hikers still went, but not many. The photos showed thick pine forests, rocky hills, and a river cutting through the valley. It looked perfect for a quiet weekend away from noise, people, and phone service. I left on a Friday morning with my old Ford pickup. I had my tent, sleeping bag, a small propane stove, enough food for 3 days, and a hunting knife I'd had since high school. The drive was about 4 hours, most of it through twisting mountain roads. The last 30 minutes were on a gravel path covered in pine needles, and I had to drive slow. It felt peaceful though, I rolled down the window and let the cold air in. By the time I parked near the start of the trail, the sun was already starting to drop behind the mountains. I didn't want to set up camp in the dark, so I hiked about half a mile in until I found a flat, open area beside the creek. The ground was damp but firm, and I could hear the steady rush of water just a few yards away. It was perfect. I set up my tent, unpacked some food, and lit a small fire using the wood that was scattered nearby. The forest was completely silent except for the water and the occasional creak of trees moving in the wind. I remember feeling relaxed, almost proud of myself for finally doing this alone. That first night, I slept fine. I woke up a few times because of how quiet it was. It's strange how silence can be louder than noise when you're not used to it. But nothing felt off. The next day, I hiked up the ridge that ran along the creek. The higher I got, the more I realized how isolated the place was. No signs of other campers, no footprints, nothing. I walked for about 5 hours and then made it back to camp in the late afternoon. I cooked some beans and jerky, wrote a few lines in my small notebook, and sat near the fire until it got dark. Around midnight, I woke up. First, I didn't know why. Then I heard something, a faint crack somewhere in the woods behind my tent. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. It sounded like a branch snapping under weight. I lay still, listening. After a few seconds, I heard another one, then silence again. Could have been an animal. A deer, maybe a bear. But I didn't hear any breathing, no movement after that. Just dead quiet. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I went to check around the area. About 50 yards away from my tent, I found something strange. A tree branch had been broken off about 6 feet high, not snapped cleanly like from wind or falling weight, but twisted. Under it, the ground had light impressions. Not clear footprints, but enough to notice. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just the wind pushing against a heavy branch until it gave way. The day went normally after that. I collected firewood, cleaned my cooking pan in the creek, and spent a few hours fishing even though I didn't catch anything. But by the time the sun began to set, that uneasy feeling started coming back. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every little noise made me sit up. I could hear rustling sometimes, always faint, always far. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something again. Slow, uneven steps through the brush. Not animal-like. It stopped for a long time, and then something tapped lightly against metal. I realized it was the side of my truck parked near the trail entrance. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe loud. My tent was zipped up, my flashlight off. I waited for it to stop. It did after maybe a minute or two, and then there was only the sound of the creek again. At dawn, I went straight to my truck. On the passenger side door, there were small marks, thin, straight lines like someone had dragged a stick or a knife along the paint. It wasn't deep, but it wasn't accidental either. I looked around, heart pounding, but there was nobody. I decided to leave that day. I packed everything up fast, threw my gear in the back, and got behind the wheel. But as I started driving down the rough road, the truck began to shake harder than normal. I stopped and got out. The front right tire was low, not flat yet, but leaking. I checked and saw a piece of what looked like thin metal stuck into the rubber, like a shard. I had a spare, but it was buried under all my gear. It took me 20 minutes to swap it, and the entire time I felt like someone was watching from the trees. I couldn't shake that feeling. By the time I hit the main road, I didn't stop until I was back near a small diner 2 towns over. I parked and got out to stretch. When I turned back toward my truck, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On the back of the tailgate, drawn in the dust that had collected over the weekend, were 3 finger lines. They weren't there before. They were uneven, long, and spaced wide apart, like someone had dragged their hand across while I was asleep or away from the truck. I didn't report anything. What would I even say? Someone scratched my car in the woods? Sounded crazy. That night, I checked into a cheap roadside motel instead of driving home. I locked the door, shut the curtains, and tried to sleep, but every time a car passed or the pipes creaked, my chest tightened. When I got back home the next morning, I unloaded everything in my driveway. My tent smelled like smoke and damp earth, and when I shook it out, a few pine needles and dirt fell out. Then something else did, a small piece of paper. It looked torn, dirty, and worn. I almost didn't notice it at first. It had a single word written in pencil, smudged but readable, that IT said, "Stay." I stood there staring at it for a long time, trying to think of where it came from. Maybe it blew into my tent when I was asleep. Maybe it was already there. Maybe I was imagining it. But the edges looked too freshly torn, like someone had put it there recently. I burned it in the fire pit behind my house that evening. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my brother, who usually laughs at everything. I just threw it in, watched it curl and blacken, and didn't go camping again for a long time. Even now, years later, I still drive that old Ford. The scratches on the door are still faintly visible when the sun hits it right. I tried buffing them out once, but they always seem to catch the light again. Sometimes I still think about Marrow Creek. I wonder if someone lives out there, in those woods. Someone who doesn't want people coming back. I don't know what they wanted from me, or if they were just watching. But I do know one thing: whatever or whoever it was, they weren't lost. They knew exactly where I was the entire time. It was late August of 2017 when I decided to spend a quiet weekend camping alone in the English countryside. I had just turned 28 and needed a break from the noise of London. I found a spot near the edge of the Peak District, a secluded area about a mile from the nearest village called Roseley. I'd read online that it was peaceful, surrounded by tall oaks and streams that cut through the hills. I wanted silence, just the sound of the wind and my small fire crackling at night. I arrived that Saturday morning around 9. The weather was cool, damp, and gray, typical English summer skies. The grass was wet from last night's rain, and my boots sank slightly into the soft ground as I carried my gear from my car down a muddy path. I set up my tent near a slope that overlooked a small clearing. The air smelled of wet soil and pine. I remember thinking it felt perfect, quiet, calm, and completely isolated. I spent the day hiking through the nearby woods, following deer trails and photographing small streams. There wasn't a soul around, not a single camper. The silence was so thick I could hear the distant rush of wind through the trees for miles. Around 4 p.m., I returned to camp and cooked a small meal over my portable stove. By the time I finished, the sky was already darkening with thick clouds that looked like they could burst any moment. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. Across the clearing, maybe 100 yards away, stood a man. He was facing my direction, motionless. At first, I thought he might have been another camper, though I hadn't heard anyone approach. He wore a long, dark coat that almost blended with the shadows of the trees behind him. His posture was strange, too stiff, like he was just standing there, watching. I didn't think much of it then. I assumed maybe he was just another hiker resting before heading back. Still, something about the way he stood there made me uneasy. I looked down for a moment to adjust my stove, and when I looked back up, he was gone. That night, the rain started again. Steady, cold drops tapping against my tent. The wind pushed through the trees, making them groan and creak. I lay inside, reading on my phone with the dim light of my lantern, until I heard a branch snap outside. It was close, too close to be the wind. I froze and turned off the light. The sound came again, slower this time, like someone stepping on wet leaves. I waited, listening carefully. The rain masked most of the noise, but every now and then, I caught faint movements, a shuffle, then nothing. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a fox. Eventually, I forced myself to sleep, though it was a shallow, uneasy kind of rest. When I woke up early the next morning, the rain had stopped, and everything smelled like damp wood. The forest was quiet again. But when I stepped outside my tent, I noticed footprints in the mud. Not mine. They were faint, pressed near the tree line facing my tent. The shape and size looked human. They led out of the clearing and disappeared into the woods. I felt a strange weight in my chest as I stared at them. I kept trying to reason it out. Maybe the man I saw yesterday had walked by. Maybe he was camping nearby and just passed through. But it didn't sit right. There hadn't been any other tents, no cars, no signs of life. Still, I brushed it off. I spent that afternoon exploring further down a dirt track that led to a small abandoned farm I'd seen on my map. The building was falling apart. Walls caved in, the roof eaten by moss and time. It looked like it had been empty for decades. Inside, there were old tools, rusted buckets, and what looked like a rotting mattress in one corner. It was unsettling, but in a fascinating way. I stayed only long enough to take a few pictures before heading back. By the time I got back to camp, it was late afternoon again. The wind had picked up, and the sky had that dull orange tint that comes before dusk. I decided to pack up most of my gear early so I wouldn't have much to do the next morning. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My cooler, which I had left beside the tent, was open. Some of the food was missing, a pack of sandwiches, a small bag of crisps, even a bottle of water. I knew I hadn't left it open. I always closed it tight to keep animals out, but there were no claw marks, no torn packaging. It was as if someone had carefully opened it and taken what they wanted. That was the moment it truly hit me that someone might have been coming into my campsite. I didn't eat much that night. I sat by the fire longer than usual, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. Around 10 p.m., I finally crawled into my tent. I could hear the faint rustle of trees again, the steady hum of wind moving through the forest. Then I heard it, that same crunch of footsteps in the mud, slow and deliberate. It wasn't an animal. I could tell by the rhythm, too heavy, too human. My heart started pounding as I turned off my lantern and listened. The footsteps stopped, and for a few seconds, the only sound was the wind. Then came another sound, softer, closer, like someone brushing against the fabric of my tent. I held my breath. My body was frozen. The noise moved from one side of the tent to the other, slow and cautious. Then silence again. I waited what felt like hours, staring into the dark, every muscle tense. At some point, I must have drifted off because when I opened my eyes, it was morning. The light seeped through the damp fabric of my tent. Everything looked normal at first, but when I unzipped the flap, I saw something that made my skin crawl. There were muddy footprints right outside, circling around my tent. They were deep, fresh, and in some places the heel marks were twisted, like whoever it was had been standing still for a long time, turning slowly in place. The fire pit had been disturbed too. A few of the stones kicked aside. I didn't waste a second. I packed everything as fast as I could, barely caring how neatly it went into my bag. My hands were shaking as I folded the tent. The forest suddenly felt different, heavier, darker, like every shadow was holding something just out of sight. As I walked back toward the trail leading to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked back, I thought I saw movement between the trees, just for a split second. The walk that had taken me 20 minutes on the way in now felt endless. When I finally reached my car, I tossed everything in and slammed the doors shut. My heart didn't stop racing until I was miles away from the woods. That night, after I got home, I went through the photos on my camera. Most were just nature shots, trees, the stream, the old farm. But one picture made my stomach twist. It was a photo I'd taken of the clearing from the edge of the woods on the first day. In the distance, near where my tent stood, was a faint shape, a tall figure in a dark coat. I hadn't noticed it when I took the picture. I deleted the photo immediately, but it didn't help. Even now, years later, I still remember that man. The way he stood so still, the sound of those footsteps around my tent. Sometimes I wonder if he was living out there, hidden somewhere deep in those woods, watching anyone who wandered too close. I never went camping alone again after that. And whenever I drive through that part of Derbyshire, I avoid the turnoff that leads toward Roseley. The memory of that weekend still crawls under my skin, because I know what I saw was real, and somewhere out there, that man might still be walking through those woods, waiting for the next person to pitch a tent too far from the road. It was late September of 2018 when I decided to take a short solo camping trip out near Shiprock, New Mexico. I was 27 then, working construction, and needed a weekend away from everything. I had grown up camping, so being out there alone didn't bother me much. I packed light, a tent, some basic food, a small stove, a flashlight, a knife, and my old .22 rifle. I planned to spend 2 nights out there, maybe do a little hiking, clear my head. The drive out was quiet. Once I left the small towns behind, the road stretched into open land. Nothing but dirt and brush, rocks scattered like broken bones across the red earth. The sky looked massive, the kind that makes you feel small. I found a small dirt pull-off that led to a flat spot beside a shallow ravine. It was a good place, isolated, but not too far from the road in case I needed to leave fast. By the time I set up camp, the sun was starting to dip behind the mesas. The air turned cool, that kind of desert chill that seeps in fast once the light fades. I built a small fire, cooked a can of chili, and watched the stars come out. The night was completely silent. No traffic, no voices, nothing. Just the faint wind brushing through the dry grass. Around midnight, I decided to turn in. I put out the fire, crawled into my tent, and zipped it up. I lay there for a while listening to the wind hit the tent fabric, the kind of rhythmic sound that almost lulls you to sleep. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up, not from a noise exactly, but from that strange feeling you get when something isn't right. It was like my body woke me before my mind even understood why. I stayed still, eyes open, listening. The wind had stopped completely. Everything was too quiet, unnaturally quiet. Then I heard its slow, dragging footsteps moving through the gravel outside my tent. Not a steady walk, but uneven, like someone limping or sliding their feet. I froze. My heart started pounding, and every small sound felt amplified. The rustle of my sleeping bag, the faint creak of the tent poles. The steps came closer, circling the tent. I could hear the dirt crunching under weight, deliberate, slow. I wanted to believe it was an animal, maybe a coyote or something, but I could tell by the rhythm that it wasn't. It was bipedal. I could hear the shift in the dirt as it moved, one foot, then the other dragging a little. I held my breath. My rifle was outside, leaning against a rock near the fire pit. Then it stopped right behind my tent. I didn't move. I could feel my skin tighten all over my body, like every nerve was aware of the space between me and whatever was standing there. After a few seconds, I heard this faint clicking sound, not from the ground, but higher up, like it was coming from its mouth or throat. It was quick, irregular, and didn't sound natural. I can't explain it perfectly, but it was wrong in a way that made my stomach twist. For almost a full minute, nothing happened. Then I heard the lightest brush of fabric. The side of my tent moved, just barely. Something dragged its hand or fingers down the nylon wall. I could hear each fingertip move across it, slow and shaky. I don't think I've ever been that still in my life. After a long while, the steps started again, moving away from the tent. I waited until I couldn't hear anything at all before I slowly unzipped the tent just a few inches and looked out. The moon was bright enough that I could see most of the campsite. Everything looked normal. My small fire pit was cold, my bag of supplies still by the rock. I didn't see anyone, but then I noticed something about 30 feet away near the ravine. A dark shape crouched down low, almost blending into the brush. At first, I thought it was just a shadow or a bush, but then it shifted slightly. I could see a shoulder rise, the outline of a head, something watching me. It wasn't moving much, just crouched and still. I closed the tent again, heart racing so hard it hurt. I stayed awake until dawn, barely breathing, gripping my pocket knife the entire time. When the sun came up, I got out carefully and looked around. The spot where I saw the shape had faint impressions in the dirt. Footprints, but they weren't right. They were long, narrow, and the toes looked strange, almost stretched. Not like a barefoot human, not like an animal either. Just off. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, maybe imagining things from being alone too long. I made coffee, packed my things, and told myself I'd leave by noon. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I'd catch myself turning toward the ravine every few minutes. Nothing moved, but I couldn't relax. Around mid-morning, I decided to take a short walk to clear my head. I followed a small animal trail that led up a ridge behind the campsite. The higher I got, the more I could see. Endless stretches of red dirt, rocks, dry trees, and emptiness. But when I looked back down at my camp, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a figure standing near my tent. From that distance, I couldn't see its face, but it was tall and thin, standing completely still. It looked like a man, but its posture was strange, too stiff, and its arms hung lower than they should have. I froze. I don't know how long I stood there, just watching it, but when I blinked, it was gone. Not walked away, just gone. I ran down that ridge fast, stumbling over rocks and brush. When I got back, my campsite was empty again. No footprints, no sign of anyone. But the zipper on my tent was half open. I knew I had closed it all the way before leaving. Inside, my sleeping bag was pulled halfway out, like someone had been rummaging through it. That was enough for me. I threw everything into the truck without even folding it. As I was about to leave, I looked one last time toward the ravine. On the other side, about 100 yards out, I saw it again. It was standing there on the edge, completely still, facing me. The way it stood, too tall, too thin, slightly tilted forward, made every instinct in me scream to get out. I didn't stay another second. I got in the truck, started it, and drove until the dirt road turned back into pavement. I didn't even stop until I hit a gas station about 40 miles away. I sat there for a while, trying to steady my breathing, staring at the empty road behind me. That night, I checked my gear at home. The tent had long, thin marks on one side, like scratches but spaced too wide apart for a hand. I told myself it could have been branches or rocks when I packed up too fast, but deep down I didn't believe it. I've been camping all my life, and I've heard coyotes, bears, even mountain lions at night. This wasn't any of that. The way it moved, the way it watched, the silence that came before it, it wasn't normal. I haven't gone camping alone since then. I still think about that night sometimes when it's quiet enough. Every time I do, I remember that sound, the slow dragging footsteps, the clicking noise, and the sight of something too human to be an animal but too wrong to be a person. And I know, without any doubt, that something was out there with me that night. Something real.